Thank you. So we our heading is Future of Construction Design and Development, but in reality, we've got a really diverse panel here that scales the entire spectrum of real estate. So really what we're going to be talking about is the future of real estate, because what we have is we have an actual disruptor in our midst here, John with eBuilder. Tony is the godfather here of Wynwood and is built and created all kinds of neighborhoods with Ray, part of the design, and then Martin is responsible for building and making sure everything gets built. So we're going to really cover the entire spectrum of what's going on in our industry. And as you've heard this morning, and you're hearing just from lunch and everything, we are in a truly, transformative era. It's not a decade and it's not measured in years, but I mean, this is a truly transformative era. Everything that we do is changing. And the people that are embracing it are the ones that are enjoying what they're doing and are looking forward to the future, and they're looking forward to, where this business is taking us. And so the panelist here, I think, reflects, the forward thinking of what we're doing today, what we're living with today, but more importantly, some of the areas that we're seeing on the horizon. So I'm going to have a quick little intro. I just want everybody to just give a quick little background on kind of who they are and what their firm does, and then we'll jump into a few questions. So. Wrong Picture John. We'll just call him Wrong Picture John.
Okay. Ken, thank you. So I'm John Antevy, co-founder of eBuilder. It was my master's thesis out of college, a degree in architecture and master's in construction management. Thesis became the business plan. I was broke for the first 5 years. But we effectively created an online project management software for owners to manage their construction projects and ultimately bring down the cost of the project by about 4%, which doesn't sound like a lot, but most of the projects we're on could be $30 billion of data centers for Facebook or Miami-Dade Water and Sewer, City of Miami Beach, so higher ed, K-12, schools, et cetera. We're based out of Fort Lauderdale. We're about 300 people. Started in '95. A Gator is where I was a school dad. Don't hold that against me. And in February, we sold our company to Trimble for $500 million. So we were trying to do a lot for the community and give back and share.
That deserves a round of applause, I would think. Is that why we're all here today?
That's right. Well, thanks for having me.
Martin?
All right.
Or Martine?
Martin, depends on where you're from. Disclaimer, construction workers are not known for their eloquency. So, my name is Martin Bandin. I'm a project controls manager for Plaza Construction. I've been with the company for 13 years, kind of boots on the ground in project management. Witnessing the other side of this, that is once I step off the project, which is the real estate side, has been extremely eye-opening and interesting. Construction, the way I see it, has been extremely analog, and we have been way behind in adopting technologies. At Plaza Construction, we're moving towards adopting as much as we can, as quick as we can, to make sure that our jobs are safe and that we're producing our work both with quality and on schedule. Plaza Construction is a construction management firm here since 2002. We've put down about $2.5 billion in contract work since then.
Awesome. And my neighbor in the building that I've been in for 13 years. One correction, Tony Goldman is the godfather of Wynwood. I'm the junior apprentice under Tony Goldman. I had the good fortune of mentoring under him and learning a lot from him. But Tony Cho, founder of Metro One, full-service commercial brokerage and investment and development company. Been based here in Wynwood for the last 13 years. Co-founded the Magic City Innovation District in Little Haiti, which is an exciting project that we'll get into more around innovation and technology and the innovation ecosystem. Been very passionate as an entrepreneur, an investor in the Miami ecosystem in general, and really kind of helping to support these emerging neighborhoods like Wynwood, and really excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Great.
Thanks, Tony. My name is Ray Fort. I'm a project designer at Arquitectonica. I've been doing that for the past 6 years. Arquitectonica is a multidisciplinary design firm. We do architecture, landscape architecture, interiors, and I've worked on a lot of projects here in Wynwood, some of them which are under construction right now, and including other projects in the area and globally. Arquitectonica has 10 offices worldwide with its headquarters here in Miami.
Welcome. All right. So we're gonna run through a few big sort of picture topics and some themes, and then hopefully, because again, we really do cover the entire spectrum here, we want to leave some time so that we can have some audience participation and some questions. So first thing around sort of technology, let's talk about how sort of some of the new technologies have affected the way you guys are doing your business today versus 2, 3, 5 years ago. Some of the is it hype as a reality? Whether it's augmented reality, virtual reality, drones. Tell me some of the technology that has really sort of impacted the way you do business today versus where you were doing it a few years ago. I'm going to leave you out because you created the technology, but these guys are actually living in it. But I want to get back to John in a second. So on the construction side, Martin.
On the construction side, the development and offering of mobile applications has dramatically changed our field operations. Again, construction being very analog, we still had paper physical drawings as recent as 5 or 6 years ago, taken up. It would be a plans table the size of the stage. And now, with as affordable as tablets are, and really as affordable as the mobile apps are, we're putting full construction drawings essentially in the back pocket of all of our superintendents, but also our subcontractors. And more beneficial than anything is a dissemination of information. We know that project designs change minute by minute. In years past, we'd have to literally courier or mail out design changes to upwards of 25 subcontractors in one project. Now that that distribution of information is instant, we're seeing an increase of productivity because of that. Less errors are made. Work is being put in as quickly as the changes come to us.
Tony.
Yeah, in terms of, technology is transforming the whole world, but in real estate, since real estate is not the fastest moving business, things take time, financing takes time, entitlements take time. So I think, when you're trying to sell a neighborhood like we did in Wynwood and now we're trying to do in Little Haiti, these tools are becoming increasingly more valuable and interesting, whether it's, 3D modeling and virtual reality or mixed reality, when you're trying to show somebody, no, the coffee shop is going to be here and the baker is going to be here and the co-working space is going to be here. It's extremely difficult for people to visualize that. So we're finding that in the space of marketing and selling and getting people psyched about a project or a neighborhood, that technology is playing an increasing role on telling the narrative. And that's what we are, as real estate developers, as neighborhood developers. We're telling a narrative and we're showing people, what the future is going to look like. And I think that it's very critical, especially when you're doing large projects, like the one that Nitin is doing in downtown Miami World Center or Magic City, that is a multi-decade project. With the rate that building materials and technology and engineering is evolving, if you don't stay on the cutting edge of all of these latest and greatest techniques and technologies, you're going to really miss out on a lot of opportunity. I have a friend who's a developer in Shenzhen in China, and he prefabbed a 57-story high-rise and built it in 26 days. So there, in terms of how fast we are advancing, we're still way behind in a lot of ways, and I think a lot of that has to do with the permitting process and just the governmental component that gets in the way of really us moving quickly towards developing these projects and having them come to fruition. But I think the most exciting thing is kind of innovating in real time and kind of creating open source development where you're getting community input, you're getting professional input, and you guys are co-creating what this looks like. The way that I envision these communities and cities of the future, off-grid, completely sustainable, alternative energy, vertical farming, green roofs, being fully resilient if a Category 5 hurricane hit Miami. How are we dealing with that? We almost had that happen last year. How are we addressing sea level rise? The only solutions are in technology, and I think that we have to really embrace these things, and I think that's really the solution for having these successful developments.
Yeah, I think Tony is actually right on point with some of these things. And in terms of the architecture industry, BIM modeling has been around for a very long time, about 20 years, but
Tell
it
them
really...
what.
Building information modeling. So essentially what I'm referring to are 3D modeling programs like Revit, in which basically all engineering trades and consultants are working in now. It used to be that you had only the largest firms that adopted these techniques, and even now, and it was only largest firms because there was a cost in terms of entry to barrier to that type of software, but also people weren't doing it faster because there was a rate at which people had to learn how to use these programs. Nowadays, it's almost every single firm that is using these building information systems and modeling software. But beyond that, though, I think one of the bigger disruptions that we've seen in the industry is how technology is affecting the user, and then how the user is using space differently. So we've seen package rooms increase 3 to 4 times the size of what they used to be, because people are now receiving so many packages that it started to impact how the lobby of a building looked. That you'd have packages stacked up in a lobby of a building that previously didn't have a package room to begin with. So that's begun to change the way we allocate space towards the different programs within these buildings, and that's just one example, but it's more that the technology, at least from what I've been seeing, technology is impacting the user at the end of the day, and then that sort of gets back to the developer and the architect, and how can we solve some of these problems that we're experiencing in our current buildings.
John, talk a little bit about, how you sort of evolved in terms of taking some of the processes that these guys are talking about and created eBuilder and sort of give them a little perspective of terms of what it does and how it's changed people's lives.
In '95, when we started, there was primarily, SharePoint wasn't even around. You had what they called FTP sites, that file transfer protocol, very simple mechanisms to transfer files. The internet wasn't yet really commercialized. It was just getting commercialized at that time. So we initially started at some of you may know the Staples Center Arena out in Los Angeles. That was one of our first projects. And their problem was that they had all these requests for information from the contractor, between the contractor and the architect. And they were doing it through fax machines.
And the developer.
And the developer, correct. And they all, how do you connect all these together? So there were hundreds of RFIs, they were all behind, and they needed a better way to speed up because it was ultimately slowing down the construction. And this was a design build project, so they had to be right behind each other. So that's really what started it. Centralized document management with requests for information. What it evolved into over time was managing all the potential changes on a project. So there's a big money component. And in the last few years, so tremendous amount of building information models being stored in the system. We have a lot of road building clients now that I've seen it already. They have drones that automatically program to leave the trailer on a platform, and they'll survey 5 or 10 miles of roadway, video footage, come back, and then they put it into software to then analyze what was placed that day. So they're using it for progress updates completely through drone technology. And in this case, we're not doing that technology, but we're storing that information in. And now as part of Trimble, they created a lot of the GPS software that are on a lot of the Caterpillar machinery. And literally today, as earthwork is being moved, as you're developing a big plot of land, there literally could be hundreds of thousands of dollars, per day, per week, or per month that's spent as a result. And that information of data goes via GPS or through these receivers directly into systems like ours and others, so that the owner can see, here's how much progress was completed today, this week, or this month. They can see the dollars, and they can compare it to the schedule to see if they're on time and on budget.
Let's talk a little bit about, you talked about dollars. I mean, where does all this technology stand in terms of costs? Are you really sort of driving costs out of the systems with technology? I mean, John will talk about, percentage savings or so on and so forth. But are you guys seeing, we were talking back there about, are you going to spend the money to get a, AR system for, Magic City or so on and so forth? Where are you sort of seeing, the costs of these technologies versus, kind of the benefits? Anybody? Go ahead, Ray.
So, but you're talking about the cost of
These new technologies, these specific.
Well, I think it's a cost that eventually just gets baked into the project, and it might start at something that's high, but over time it becomes something that's low. Like take solar panels, or a better local example, impact glass. Right, every project now is using impact glass, but it used to not be that back in the after 1994 building code. When after Hurricane Andrew hit, that's what really changed the way we think about resilient buildings and how we calculate wind loads and types of products that go into a building. So I think that when it comes to implementing technologies into the building, oftentimes it gets absorbed as sort of a normalized cost, and I don't know necessarily if it's increasing the overall cost of the building or if it's getting taken out of somewhere else. I mean, the package room example is a good one because yes, you're allocating more space towards packages, so you're essentially losing that square footage that could have otherwise been used for, say, retail. But then you now have companies like Luxor that manage all those packages for you and in essence become a tenant. So it's now no longer on the responsibility of building management to pick up that added cost. It becomes something that is external. I think it varies on a case-by-case basis is what I mean to say.
Tony, talk about.
I think not all technology is applicable. I think that you have to experiment. I mean, that's what technology is. It's an experiment for trying to make things better and more efficient and disrupting certain industries. I mean, when we look at self-driving cars and automated vehicles and where that's going, are we thinking about what we're going to do with garages in the future? Are we centralizing those locations? And I know people today who are building garages with an adaptive reuse model in mind. So I think it's about innovation, and I think it's about testing and investing. And I think every company should have a certain allocation and a budget towards technology that helps streamline things and create a frictionless environment for their customer and for their own operations. And so from an internal side, I mean, we use a lot of technology in terms of softwares and GPS mapping stuff and tracking all of our leads and follow up with customers. And so I think that has really boosted our productivity as well. And some were good and some were bad and some have evolved, and you have to customize things. So I think technology really needs to be tested and tried out, and you need to invest in it. In the VR and AR space, I mean, we're still a ways away from it being commercially adopted and not being wonky and having the type of glasses that we've seen out there, but really becoming integrated into our entire view corridor of what we're doing. But it's going to change the way that retail happens. It's changing the way that we buy stuff and the way that we experience things. So I think we are going to make an investment in a VR package to show what we're building, because it's hard to believe, and sometimes you need to use that to show the narrative of what you're trying to create. So I think.
How do you envision that? Do you buy it? Somebody then comes to you and puts on the wonky glasses and does it, or do you send it out to people? How do you envision using it?
Well, it could be either. I mean, obviously, what's great about it is that you can be remote and you can be from anywhere around the world and experience what's happening from Russia or from Africa or anywhere in the world, and kind of get a tour of these neighborhoods and these experiences, and meet Zach the Baker, for example, or have that kind of interactive experience that will give you a little bit of a flavor of these different projects, these different neighborhoods that it's very hard to get, in a colorful, 3D brochure or just a regular, corporate, brochure. So I think, it's changing the way that we all interact, and in terms of our social networks and the amount of people that we can impact instantly, it's just a different game. I mean, I think one of the glaring examples that we're all seeing here in Wynwood is, I think one of the successes of Wynwood was the rise of Instagram and social media. I mean, Wynwood became this huge success globally, almost as simultaneously as it was happening locally, with all the people coming in, the tourists, because I think of all these Instagram influencers taking photos in front of these incredible murals, and it just going all over the world and going viral. And I think that was kind of the right timing. And you're seeing that happening in other places as well. So it's the use of technology to promote products, neighborhoods, projects, et cetera. And the timing of that are these new technologies, and kind of when they hit their maturity, and then when they become obsolete, right? Some people remember MySpace. Does anybody remember MySpace? So, these technologies are evolving so quickly, we don't know if Uber, Facebook, and Twitter and Instagram will even be around in 5 years. Everything that's happening with blockchain and cryptocurrencies and are changing the whole system and the Internet of Things that is happening in this world. So there's a huge, huge shift in technology, and I think you have to invest in it. You have to try things out, but sometimes you get lemons, and sometimes you get bad products that are not applicable. So it's trial and error, I think, like with anything else.
Right.
Yeah, and I liked also the parking example, because there's a couple of components to it, but as we all know, parking requirements, at least in areas that are not as urban as Manhattan, are a big deal when it comes to development. And Uber is not necessarily changing the way everybody commutes. And so there's a component of how quickly the culture shifts in a place to not use their car. So even though a municipality might allow you to reduce your parking requirements to 0, does it get adapted by the user? And what can you do in the meantime while that adaptability is occurring to make a smarter building for the future? An example of that is a project we recently designed where we accommodated, instead of 6 floors of parking, we did 2 floors of parking, all with stackers, and we utilized tandems as well. And so by implementing the parking lifts, it forced the idea of a higher floor to floor. In this case, we chose 14 to be able to add an office floor plate in the future later, or some other kind of use. The point being is that as parking becomes less utilized, you can recover that square footage and use it for something else without having to demolish the entire building, right? And there's been a couple of methodologies in doing so, is either creating the higher floor-to-floor heights or building standalone garages that
There's a
are
cost
essentially
associated with that as well, right?
correct. But
so,
in one sense, it's saving you money, because now you're not building the additional 2 floors of parking. You're just adding the stackers, which on a per square foot basis is less. So I think that using the technology in the end has to be adapted by its user, and there's an absorption rate to the technology, not only to just spaces and real estate, as we know. And so there's a way to plan for that, and we've been doing so in projects, and it also ties into the progressiveness of municipalities. I think Wynwood is another very good example where planning departments are not only looking at the whole city as how it should be zoned, and what the sectors of that city should be zoned as, but how that neighborhood should be zoned, and that one building will now fit into a context that has already been pre-arranged, if you will. What will go where. And Wynwood has its own overlay, its own zoning code that is a modification of everything else around it. So it will inevitably have its own character, and relationships between buildings and streetscapes are also very important. And going back to what I said earlier, it all is user-based. And I think we'd had this discussion prior about productivity of the user and what's going to generate that. And it starts from how we're treating them within the building and what happens to them when they get outside the building. And frankly, parking is a big discussion about that. Is parking increasing your quality of life, or is it decreasing your quality of life?
John, talk a little bit about, you were talking about the end user, type experience and productivity and designing, kind of healthier offices and more efficient offices and so on and so forth. But ultimately, productivity is going to be based on how receptive people are to using, the new technology and the new platforms and so on and so forth. And what kind of, adaptation problems or issues did you have in terms of trying to get people to become effectively more productive?
So it's always that three-legged stool: people, process, and technology. So you could have all the greatest technology in the world, but if the people aren't going to use it effectively, or if they don't agree on the process, it's not going to work. So you have to start with the people, and it starts with the problems that the people have. So I'll use Jackson Healthcare as an example, right? They're building a $1.4 billion, set of buildings down here, and one of their issues is that they take a long time to pay their vendors, contractors, right? 174 days.
Mark doesn't expect to get paid.
Right?
Longer than that.
Longer, right? What if you could bring it down to under 30 days, right? So that was a opportunity that they had, and which they've accomplished through our system. And in return, though, they've gone back to those contractors and said, if we can pay you within 30 days, can you give us a break on our invoices? And some of them have. And what we've already been told is that that reduction is already paid for whatever the cost of eBuilder was, in that example. So I think the key is you have to have motivators. And if a contractor can see, if I use a contractor example, hey, not only am I going to get paid faster, but I could see where my payment is in the process instead of being in this black hole. So systems like ours and others allow that to happen. Suddenly there's an inclination to say, hey, I do want to look at these technologies and use them. And another quick example is productivity. University of Southern California had, something like 30 some odd project managers. Now they still have that same amount of project managers. Their workload has nearly doubled, and they have effectively the same amount of people managing all the additional project workload. So again, it starts with the motivation from the problem, and then you back into what the solution could be for that.
Martin, you were going to...
On that note, we did at Plaza implement a online payment distribution system that is been applauded by all our subcontractors. We process anywhere from 25 to 30 invoices per month on any given project, and the distribution of those funds can be quite laborious. So the online distribution has really worked out. Backing up to your earlier question about how technology is helping us mitigate cost, as a contractor, as a construction manager, I want to say the gross majority of all our costs are pass-throughs to our clients, to developers. And we do here, at least in South Florida, we see a lot of pushback from our developers on emerging technologies. Even you referenced BIM earlier. We tend to not see a lot of our developers adopt BIM or see that that benefit up front for it. And we roll the dice sometimes as a contractor, and we'll invest on our own in the technologies and initiate our own departments. And we find that coordination efforts, and that's the detection of clashes between different systems in a building can be dramatically reduced. The timing can be reduced by using these virtual kind of 3D spaces, using applications like Revit and such. And also with respect to safety, we're now looking into IoT devices and even sensors or even wearables that we're going to put on our labor force that is not only going to track where in the building is our labor, because we want to focus specific labor at different parts of the building, but also in the event that anybody gets hurt, we can respond to it quickly. Those are the kind of technologies that we're adopting regardless of whether it's a pass-through to our clients or not.
Cool. All right, so we have a few minutes left before we get to some questions. I wanted to talk a little bit about, kind of the real estate aspect of it again, and kind of looking to the future, specifically Tony, Ray, in terms of some of the projects that we're designing, envisioning. You hear a lot of words out there today about, sort of experiential, whether it's in regard to retail or engaging, office environments. What are you guys seeing in terms of, the design, the vision that's going to create, kind of the, the real estate of the future that is not going to get people scared, shitless about investing in retail or anything else related to real estate?
Well, I think the world is changing and evolving. The real estate landscape is changing and evolving, and you have to adapt to it. I mean, the population's growing, resources are dwindling, cities are becoming more populated. I always say this, but in 30 years from now, 73% of the world's populations will live in cities. Today, it's 51%. And so the way that we design and build cities and the built environment needs to be extremely thoughtful and needs to be very innovative, because we're going to rebuild the built environment 2 times over in the next 30 to 50 years.
How are you guys on all sides building in that kind of flexibility so that you can, because normally you'd build out a retail store or whatever it is and you'd forget about it for the next, 10 or 15 years. But now you're going to need to redesign that space. Have you started to look, whether it's in the garage or in the actual, space itself, have you guys started to really analyze the kind of the reuse of space in projects?
Absolutely. In many instances, we'll be doing layouts that are for a specific type of user, but make sure that the bones of the buildings can accommodate a different kind. And I can't necessarily be too specific, but we're definitely studying those aspects of it. There have been some models for residential, like co-living, and that I think are doing very well. But they're just simply, there might be different alternative methods of living in the future that we have to think about how those can be accommodated from those base models of co-living, as an example.
You were talking about the project here that was going to be...
And even here in Wynwood, with Cube going up, that building certainly contemplates multiple types of users within it, from an office perspective, and at one point it was considered to be a live-work building, but it really is an office building. And the module and the way that the structure is laid out can accommodate any number of configurations. Yeah, that's right. That's a good example of one.
Ray and I are working on an interesting project that, the working title is Wynwood 29. It's a project we're doing with Related here on Northwest 1st Avenue between 28th and 29th Street. It's 182 micro units, and really looking to how to make things, smaller and more efficient, and really the types of furniture that will go in there and the type of uses that will happen, and the flexibility for the investors and the millennials and what people want. You were talking about packing rooms, we're talking about Uber drop-off areas, we're talking about things that the new consumer is looking for and demanding. But as resources dwindle, what I was saying is that we're going to have to get more innovative in our use of space. And I think much credit to the Wynwood Business Improvement District and the effort around the NRD, really creating a progressive zoning that de-emphasized the automobile and really created an environment where we could build a building like this and basically eliminate parking. We may opt to provide some parking, but in Wynwood, if you build a building with units less than 650 square feet, you can buy the parking down to zero, pay into the Public Benefits Fund, which will then go in to create other alternative parking structures and solutions for the neighborhood. And those are the types of innovative ideas that are coming out of this demand to innovate and be creative.
Are you seeing any other municipalities being sort of creative or innovative or progressive in their thinking?
Absolutely. All over the country, we're seeing cities that are, as Tony said, de-emphasizing the automobile, but in turn, it really means that they're putting an emphasis on the pedestrian and on the user and who's walking around the place. St. Petersburg, Atlanta, different places, even Miami Beach has also came out with an entire streetscape master plan that spoke about the hierarchy of the street and where space should be allocated, and it basically said that the cyclist and the pedestrian really are the most important people there. And in this case, it really does help the real estate aspect of it. For Wynwood, as staying within the neighborhood, And using the Cube project as an example, the breezeway in that building, it's on 24th Street, 2 blocks away, not only is the entrance or the sort of outdoor lobby for the office building itself, but it becomes a place for outdoor seating. So it becomes now a multifunctional lobby that is not only outdoor space, but it's outdoor seating covered, and it's an office lobby all in one space happening. So really, it maximizes the potential, and that falls into some of the other standards that we're now incorporating into buildings like WELL. WELL is in my opinion the next standard that many buildings should be striving to become. LEED is really a standard now. It's almost in every single building, especially LEED Silver. I wouldn't go so far as saying LEED Platinum, but LEED Silver. And with WELL, it's more about the inhabitant of the building and what kinds of materials we're using within these buildings, trying to do non-toxic materials, natural ventilation, access to light. Really, these are the foundations upon which
like the solar
that code is written.
thing that we talked about before. Are these things that much more prohibitively expensive? Or
No,
Martin, I
it's
should
really
ask you.
simple. It's really taking in my opinion, it's taking the items that exist already within our palette of materials and just making sure they're organized in a manner that allows you to get to such. And in Cube, we're using covered outdoor corridors to get to all the offices as a way of making sure that every office has access to natural ventilation and light.
Yep. All right. Well, we have a few minutes left, and we touched on a number of issues locally and sort of globally. What?
I had a question.
Oh, it's like dark out there. You can't see. So we do have a few minutes for some questions. So hopefully there's some audience. Yes? Question was, how are you designing and building with regards to sea level rise, specifically here in Miami?
I just build it. I don't know the answer to that.
You do.
Okay, so are you from Miami? Yes. Okay, so Miami is broken down, and same with any other coastal town, into different flood zones. And depending on what flood zone you're in and what elevation the site sits on, there's a minimum base flood elevation. And you have to build a minimum of 1 feet above that. If you go down Brickell Avenue, you'll see that, especially in the newer buildings, none of the ground floors are at the street level. They're approximately 5 feet above the road because base flood elevation there is around 12, and the street elevation is around 7, 8, more or less in that neighborhood. So I like to use the example of Hurricane Andrew because it really did change the way we look at resiliency in South Florida especially. The 1994 building code for South Florida had a radar image of Hurricane Andrew on the cover of it. It sort of gives you an idea of what this code was built around. So starting with the base flood elevation and the code that was written according to that, every building is built to those standards, not only with impact last and structurally, but where the first habitable floor is located. We know that there is the potential that there is sea level rise imminent, and that may not always cover you. So we've been designing ground floors to be much higher so that you can essentially have a sacrificial ground floor and then put in a new slab at the correct elevation once the roads are raised as well, because the buildings can be lifted up super high, but if it's really going to kill your street life. And so it's more incremental, and it's not something that happens right away. I think that the long-term planning is just making sure we have the height, especially on the ground floor, to accommodate new slabs in the future. And this Miami Beach has this issue with historic buildings, frankly, and that those are all built at the street level, and there is a lot of protective measures around them, which certainly makes things difficult to build new. But the answer also is in new construction, because the new construction thinks about all of these issues.
So I think it's an extremely important question, something that I think has only started to resonate with politicians. I mean, I think, we still have many denier people, politicians in positions of power, at the state, local, national level, and I think we need to change that conversation, that dialogue with the politicians, because I think it has to be a concerted effort with the private and public sector really taking a stand and really investing. I mean, places where sea level rise and resiliency issues have been at the forefront have really made a very concerted effort to make a huge investment, whether it's Lower Manhattan or Venice or other places. Miami needs to start thinking like that and become this Atlantis future city that can really be very resilient and really innovate. And instead of being the poster child of a city drowning, we want to be the poster child of resolving the resiliency issue and of sea level rise. And I believe that, technology is going to play a big role in it. I think there's a lot of smart people out there doing a lot of innovative work around resiliency and sea level rise and climate change. So I think it's a parallel strategy of adaptability. Many of the things that, Ray was referring to. It's also about our land use plan and our codes and how we're adapting to it, so that if we do have to adapt and raise building floor plates and street levels, that it doesn't become a place that you don't want to live. So I think all of those considerations need to go into it, and then I think we need to think about reversing the impacts of climate change simultaneously through reducing CO2 emissions and really being proactive at the same time. I mean, I've heard all kinds of theories, that go for, from displacing the earth and going into the core of earth and drilling it to displace more water, from pumps to all different kinds of different ideas. So I think it's going to be, really it starts with having the intention and addressing it and facing and accepting that this is happening at a high level and really engaging, all the powers that be to try to work towards solutions. And I think no one has the solutions, but I think at least we're having these conversations now, and I think that that's really a positive direction.
Question was with regards to the related project and building micro units. I guess your question is, can you justify the lower per square foot cost?
Well, it's more of a lower price point that we're going for, right? Because when you have a 580 square foot unit, you're looking at 350,000. The cost is not necessarily much less per square foot, but the price per square foot that you can sell it is typically a little bit higher. And most of the new buildings are amenity rich and have a lot of common space and community space and things of that nature, which every new buyer is demanding. So it really depends on the level of product that you're delivering and what phase of the market you're in. Construction costs have not gone down that much. Actually, they've probably gone up. Materials have gone up. So it's really a function of building materials and cost. But I think the idea behind micro and smaller units is that the price point is more accessible. And I think that's the whole segment of the market that we're missing, is the accessibility, the millennial, the workforce housing, and what I call creative workforce housing, which is, there's a huge demand for that and more on the affordable, accessible creative workforce housing.
Yeah, we're hearing all kinds of, amenity. So tell me some of the amenities that you're hearing or you're designing for that people are really, kind of craving.
For that project?
In general.
In general. Okay, well, yeah, I mean, part of it stems from, accommodating yoga rooms, fitness rooms, but the simple idea of just a lawn actually is a very nice concept for some of the residents, and making a multifunctional lawn in which you can project a movie, or you can have, just sort of an activity occur on the lawn is just using some of these open spaces in buildings to create multifunctional spaces. And pool decks are certainly a must in Miami, even if it's just a small one. But generally just making sure that the spaces are large enough to accommodate more than one thing occurring within it. I think that's, and because you now have a lot of users which are obviously confined to smaller spaces, and making sure when they come down to many space, it also doesn't feel like a small space, that it has multiple things happening, and that it's a larger open area. in terms of the specifics of what's going in them, it's a huge range of items, but generally, we like to make sure that they're lofty, almost like you stepped into this warehouse of like games or something, you know? It's sort of a more surreal experience, I guess.
Yes.
Mitigating accidents on the job site using, again, wearables is something that we're looking into. Putting IoT devices or sensors temporarily throughout the building is something where we can mitigate costs as well with respect to incidents like water damage that might occur during construction. When it comes to mitigating cost on any construction project, it all comes down to schedule. And you're just trying to deliver that project either per contract or you want to better that contract date. So if you can monitor all that exposure, again, with safety, with weather, using some of this evolving technology, which is getting cheaper. IoT devices are getting dirt cheap. Accelerometers, gyros, all these things that we wear that we have in our phones right now, we're putting it into what essentially could be a pager that you clip to your belt, similar to what I'm wearing now, on every single workman on the job site. And so, again, it's watching where they are, making sure that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing so that you can maximize efficiency and deliver that project as quick as you can for your client to then start generating their revenue as quick as you can.
All right. And of course, using eBuilder to manage your project schedule, right?
He qualified, no software.
That's right. Well, we have a client that has a robot that goes around and does a laser scan of the room and then compares that laser scan to what was done the day before to track progress. So again, not eBuilder related, but trying to reduce the workforce. And some of our clients, we have mining clients, not in construction or in real estate per se, but all those trucks are autonomous. So they're going in and out all driverless,
The laser scanning has become a little bit more affordable. We're seeing that now in private construction where we can go to existing buildings, put a laser scanner up on a tripod, and essentially get an as-built down to 1/8 of an inch of accuracy. Whereas prior to that, you had to send a team of surveyors out there. It could take weeks for them to generate as-built drawings for an existing structure. But I've seen the rovers that both monitor progress and also will capture as-built conditions.
All right. Well, again, I want to thank John, Martin, Tony, Ray for giving us some real insight in terms of what we're seeing in the design, build, and innovative space and transformative neighborhood development. So give them a big round of applause.